Hi, this is tax attorney Anthony Parent, and I'm here today to speak to you about the IRS OVD updates that were released on June 26, 2012. And there is just a lot of information in there, and some of it's kind of conflicting, and so hopefully this will help you out. First thing, it is now known as OVDP, the Offshore Voluntary Disclosure Program, not the Offshore Voluntary Disclosure Initiative. So if you see those two terms, it's the same thing. Now, what's going on is since the 2011 initiative was released, a lot of people have been advising the soft disclosures, and there's been a lot of complaints about that. And then there's a lot of conflicting stories about what to do. And so the first thing that came out is that the IRS did officially publish their exception for anyone who's missing FBARs only and have no unreported income. In that case, OVDI is not required, or sorry, OVDP is not required. All you need to do is file your FBARs and send in a letter for the explanation. If that's something that you need help with, please feel free to contact us. The second one is for, well, let's just say that you have missing FBARs and you have unreported income, but your unreported income does not release an increase of tax. Now, who's that going to happen for? It's going to be somebody who has a foreign tax exclusion or some other deduction that will wipe out any additional tax that would be due. So think about an expatriate, something like that, or someone who actually has very little foreign account income. You can imagine if you have an account, a savings account, that's really not paying a lot, and that you got $10 in interest, that's really not going to affect the bottom line on your return. So in that case, same thing, just file your FBARs with a letter. Now, what is interesting is this third one, and there's an exception for inadvertent citizens or expatriates who never filed a U.S. tax return or FBAR, and they have a pretty simple return. And this happened for some complaints, and I spoke with a gentleman from Canada. This is probably a year ago, and he was explaining his story that he was a Canadian citizen his whole life. And he grew up on the border, but the day that he was born, his hospital was closed, so he went across the border to Niagara, New York, was born, went back to Canada, spent his entire life in Canada, and then when he was down in Florida looking at a condo, somebody mentioned to him that he might be a U.S. Citizen because he was born in this country. And so he looked into it and he found out that yes, he was a U.S. citizen, and he went to the U.S. Embassy and they said, yes, you need to file an FBAR. Yes, your foreign account, which was essentially his Canadian account, is subject to the OVDI. And so this exception, I talked to this gentleman at length, and he told me that he was in contact with the Prime Minister of Canada, and I think this was a deal that they were able to work out with the Canadian government. So that would really get these people who weren't even aware that they were citizens of the U.S. And you can imagine maybe sons and daughters of ambassadors in the U.S. who just happened to be born here but really never had a connection. Still a U.S. person. So in that case, the IRS has a sort of expedited, it's not an offshore disclosure, but that you are allowed to do this streamlined procedure where you file your last 3 missing returns, file last 6 years of FBARs, pay any taxes, and that's done. Now you see, I put if as long as you're unreported tax, not income, but tax, never exceeds 1,000. There's an asterisk next to that. Why is that? Well, because there's conflicting information in what the IRS has just recently published. In one place we see 1,000, and in another place we see 1,500. We hope to get some clarification on that. It's probably going to be the higher number. Okay. These exceptions are pretty narrow. Okay, and if we look at this, we can see that the soft disclosure is still not allowed, and anyway, and it's still illegal. The IRS still tells us that they will prosecute anyone it catches and their legal representative. And so any attorneys, CFPs, financial planners, enrolled agents, do not ever advise your client to make a soft disclosure. Because look, if you're taking money from someone to advise noncompliance, okay, I'm not going to say it's going to happen, but you are putting it at risk. And sure, ultimately, years down the road, you may prevail in Supreme Court, or you may not. Just don't risk anything. Just don't advise it. There's no upshot for anyone to advise the soft disclosure. And we have some other news here. We made our initial review of the new FAQ, and the FAQ is rather cut and pasted from the 2011 version because we're seeing many things that's actually referring to the old program. But the pre-clearance letter is back, and that's kind of helpful for one thing, and it actually leads into to the next thing, is that if you need to get an OVDI in real quick, okay, real quick, that's helpful. The pre-clearance letter. We typically don't do them because we get our initial letter out in a couple of days, but that is just something that's back. It's not necessary. You can just do it in your disclosure letter. The other thing, and the reason why that might be helpful, is that in the past, it used to be if your bank was under investigation, you can get into the OVDI. The only thing that could possibly stop you from getting into OVDI is if you're still engaged in crimes, if you're under investigation or under audit. Okay, so I talked with someone we hired someone in January who had an account. His personal banker was being interrogated by the Department of Justice as this client was hiring us. And he was convinced that he was going to be indicted and it was all over for him. Well, we actually got his disclosure in time. So the IRS accepted him into the program. But that is changing. I'm not going to say you can't get in. I'm just going to say you're probably going to have a hard time getting in if your bank is under investigation or your banker. And right now we're seeing a lot of banks in Israel, and the IRS also says there's about 12 Swiss banks that are going to be under investigation real soon. So if you're hemming and hawing, wondering which way to go, just keep that in mind. You may want to come clean instead of waiting, instead of taking the wait and see approach. Now, I'm just going to finish this with a true story. True story I just heard today. We had a client that we talked to who was all set to go. He understood that he had to do the OVDI program. He didn't think it was fair. We don't think it's fair either. But we didn't hear from him, so we finally got in touch with him. And again, there's no question that he had to go through with the offshore voluntary disclosure program, as he had both unreported income and missing FBARs. He went to his big national tax firm, and you would definitely know who these people are, and they actually advised him to do a soft disclosure. And then he went and called the FBAR hotline. And now this is not the offshore voluntary disclosure hotline. Rather, this is the FBAR hotline. And the FBAR, this hotline is dealing more with the bank secrecy. This is part of the IRS, but they're more focused on bank secrecy and not the offshore voluntary disclosure program. So surprisingly, the FBAR hotline, well, according to this client at least, told him to make a soft disclosure as well. And this is totally wrong. And, because we know there is just a tremendous amount of information and even conflicting information from various government agencies, we created a guide to help you through the entire offshore voluntary disclosure program. So to get more information, you can subscribe to this channel. Even better yet, click on the link below, and that's going to take you to my main website. And there you could just enter in your name. Doesn't have to be your real name, but some email address where I can send you this information. Or if you want to talk now, give us a call at 888-477-4257. Again, this is Anthony Parent of IRSMedic, and I thank you for watching.